The Selfish Little Squirrel. Once upon a time, deep in a wide golden forest, where leaves drifted down like coins of light, lived a small brown squirrel with shiny black eyes. Every day, he dashed among the trees, collecting acorns, chestnuts, and berries. His cheeks puffed full and his paws never stopped moving. He loved the sound of nuts clinking in his hollow tree. To him, it was a music of his own success. Inside a hollow at the base of an old oak tree, the little squirrel had built his secret treasure room. Acorns piled high like little mountains. Chestnuts gleamed in the dim light, and red berries were tucked away in tiny corners. The squirrel counted them proudly every day. 1, 2, 3. Oh, so many! More than anyone else could ever dream of. He whispered to himself with a smug smile, "This is all mine. No one will touch it." And whenever another animal came too close, he would puff up his tail and chatter loudly until they left. One chilly afternoon, a gentle rabbit hopped over. She tilted her head and asked kindly, "Little squirrel, you have gathered so many nuts. Could you share just a few with me?" The squirrel clutched his pile tightly. His tail bristled and he barked, "No, these are mine. I worked harder than anyone. Go find your own food." The rabbit's ears drooped. She hopped away sadly, leaving the squirrel to grin at his hoard. Not long after, a hedgehog waddled up, his spines dusted with fallen leaves. "Could you spare 1 or 2?" he asked quietly. But the squirrel snapped again, "Not a single nut! Leave me alone!" The hedgehog lowered his gaze and shuffled off into the forest. As the days passed, the little squirrel grew prouder and prouder. He climbed on top of his mountain of nuts, his tiny chest puffed out, his whiskers twitching with arrogance. "Look at me!" he chattered loudly. "No one has as much food as I do. I am the cleverest, the hardest worker, and I don't waste my time sharing." Some birds perched nearby, tilting their heads. The rabbit and the hedgehog watched from the distance, their hearts heavy. They whispered to each other, "He thinks he's so wise, but he is only alone." But the squirrel heard none of it. He laughed to himself, hugging his pile of nuts as if it were treasure. One crisp morning, the forest felt different. The air was colder, sharper, and the wind whispered through the bare branches. Golden leaves that once carpeted the ground were now swept away by icy gusts. The sky grew pale, and clouds gathered like a heavy blanket. The little squirrel poked his nose out of the hollow, a nut clutched in his paws. He shivered as a cold breeze ruffled his fur. "Huh," he muttered, quickly retreating back to his hoard. "I have more than enough. I don't need anyone." But outside, the forest animals began to hurry. The rabbit, the hedgehog, the birds, all gathering what little food they could before the snow arrived. The very next morning, soft white flakes began to drift from the sky. At first, the little squirrel pressed his paws against the hollow's edge, watching the flakes twirl and dance like tiny feathers. He giggled. "How pretty! The forest looks like a sugar cake." Snow piled on the branches, and the ground turned into a white carpet. The rabbit hopped quickly leaving little tracks behind. The hedgehog waddled under a leaf, shivering as he searched for food. But the squirrel only clutched another nut and laughed. "Let them struggle. I am safe. I have more than enough for myself." He tossed a nut into the air and caught it, smiling proudly as the snow covered the world outside. Days passed, and the snow no longer fell softly. It poured from the sky, layer upon layer, until the forest was buried under thick white blankets. The tall grass vanished, the berry bushes disappeared, and even the smallest twigs were hidden under the snow. The rabbit struggled to hop, his legs sinking with each step. The hedgehog curled up in his burrow, trying to stay warm. From inside his hollow, the little squirrel peeked out and chuckled. "Heh, now no one can find food, but I still have mine." He hugged his pile of nuts proudly, his tail twitching in satisfaction. One frosty morning, the little squirrel skipped into his hollow to enjoy a nutty feast. But when he pawed through his piles, he froze. Some of the acorns were cracked and moldy. The chestnuts had grown damp and soft. Even the berries had shriveled, turning black and dry. His eyes widened. "No, no, no, no! This can't be!" He scrambled through the heaps, but the more he checked, the more he realized his precious treasure wasn't as endless as he thought. For the first time, his smug smile vanished. That night, the little squirrel curled up in his hollow. He tried nibbling a chestnut, but it was damp and sour. He spat it out, shivering. His stomach growled loudly in the cold silence. He wrapped his tail around himself, but the emptiness inside grew heavier. For the first time, he looked at his pile of food with doubt, wondering if he truly had enough. Outside, the snow fell harder, tapping against the hollow like a steady drum. The little squirrel's eyes blinked with worry, and sleep would not come. The next morning, hunger gnawed at the little squirrel. He leapt out of his hollow and dashed into the forest. But everywhere he looked, the ground was buried beneath heavy snow. He dug with his tiny paws, but found nothing except ice and frozen twigs. His breath puffed in white clouds, his whiskers frosted stiff. He tried climbing a tree, but every branch was bare. He tried sniffing under a bush, but the snow covered it completely. Panting and trembling, the squirrel sat down in the white silence. "I thought I had enough, but now I have nothing." The little squirrel wandered through the snow, but each step felt heavier than the last. His paws sunk deep, and his legs trembled from weakness. The cold bit through his fur, and his empty belly growled louder and louder. He tried to climb a low branch, but slipped and tumbled back into the snow. Lying there, he stared at the pale sky, watching snowflakes fall onto his whiskers. His eyes stung with tears. "I was so proud, so greedy, but now I can barely stand." For the first time, the little squirrel felt truly small. The little squirrel curled up under a snowy bush, shivering and weak. He closed his eyes, and memories filled his mind. He saw the rabbit's gentle face, ears drooping when he had refused to share. He saw the hedgehog walking away sadly when he said, "Not one nut." Their voices echoed in his head, kind voices asking politely, and his own sharp reply. Tears welled in his eyes. If only I had given them just a little, maybe I would not be so alone now. His heart ached, not just from hunger, but from regret. That night, the forest was silent under a blanket of snow. The moon shone pale and cold above the trees. The little squirrel huddled alone in his hollow, his body trembling with hunger. The pile of spoiled nuts sat in the corner, useless and sad. He tried to sleep, but dreams came. Dreams of his friends sitting together, sharing food, laughing by a warm fire. When he reached for them, they vanished into the dark. He woke with a sob, his chest aching, his hollow echoing with emptiness. The next morning, the squirrel dragged himself to the hollow's edge. His fur was messy and his steps were slow. As he gazed across the snowy forest, he spotted familiar shapes moving through the white. It was the rabbit, ears bouncing with every hop, and the hedgehog waddling carefully with snow on his spines. They stopped when they saw him. The squirrel's eyes widened, his heart thumping fast. Would they laugh at him now? Would they leave him the way he had once left them? But instead, the rabbit lifted a paw and waved. The hedgehog smiled gently, their eyes full of kindness. The little squirrel could only stare, too stunned to speak. The rabbit hopped closer, pulling a small carrot from her pouch. The hedgehog carefully unwrapped some berries, bright red against the snow. They placed the food gently in front of the little squirrel. His eyes widened, his paws trembling. For me?" he whispered, his voice barely stronger than the winter wind. The rabbit nodded softly. "You look hungry. Please eat." The hedgehog added with a smile, "Friends don't let each other suffer." The squirrel's heart swelled painfully, tears blurring his eyes. He had never felt so ashamed or so grateful. The little squirrel took the carrot in his tiny paws, but before he could bite it, his eyes filled with tears. He looked at his friends, the rabbit with her kind eyes, the hedgehog with his gentle smile, and his voice cracked. I don't deserve this," he whispered. "I was greedy. I was unkind. I pushed you away when you only wanted to be my friends." A tear rolled down his cheek, then another, until his whole face was wet. The rabbit gently patted his shoulder. The hedgehog said softly, "True friends forgive. What matters is that you've learned." The little squirrel sobbed, but this time they were tears of gratitude. That evening, the rabbit, the hedgehog, and the little squirrel gathered in a small clearing. The rabbit collected twigs, the hedgehog dragged some dry leaves, and together they built a tiny fire. The flames flickered, casting warm golden light onto their faces. The snow around them glittered like 1,000 stars. The three friends huddled close, sharing the food they had, passing bites between paws and smiles between hearts. For the first time, the little squirrel felt warmth that wasn't from hoarded nuts, but from true friendship. As the fire crackled softly, the little squirrel gazed at his friends. The rabbit nibbled her carrot happily, the hedgehog hummed as he munched on berries, and together they laughed under the falling snowflakes. The squirrel felt something stirring inside him. He looked at the carrot in his paw, then broke it in half, offering the piece to the hedgehog. The hedgehog blinked in surprise, then smiled wide. The rabbit clapped her paws in delight. The squirrel's chest felt lighter than ever before. My treasure was never the nuts, he realized. It is here, with my friends. The next morning, the little squirrel awoke to the sound of birds singing. Snow still covered the forest, but his heart no longer felt heavy. He bounded into the clearing where his friends were waiting. Instead of clutching food tightly to himself, he placed a few acorns he had left in front of them. "Please," he said softly, "these are for you. I don't ever want to be greedy again." The rabbit's eyes sparkled. The hedgehog beamed. Together, they accepted the gift not for the food, but for the love behind it. The little squirrel smiled wider than ever before. Winter slowly passed, and the forest animals survived together, not because one had more than the others, but because they shared. The little squirrel no longer guarded his food. He laughed with the rabbit, played with the hedgehog, and gave freely whatever he found. The forest felt warmer, not from the fire, but from the kindness that spread between friends. The squirrel looked up at the pale winter sun, his heart glowing brighter than ever. This story teaches us that selfishness leaves us lonely, but kindness and sharing bring warmth, friendship, and true happiness.